So now comes the fun part, finding the perfect image for your cover. So ideally, from the concepts that you sketched in the previous lesson, you've got one or two covers that are in your mind. Now there are a number of websites where you can get free or cheap stock art. So one of them is Flickr. So when you're going on Flickr, make sure that you're looking at the right license. So you've got all the different licenses here. They're all under a Creative Commons license. Some of these you absolutely won't be able to use for your book. For example, anything that's written non-commercial. Others, for example, public domain, you're kind of free to do what you want with it. You also have websites like Pixabay, which has got millions of free and royalty-free stock. Then there's others like Shutterstock, again, massive collection of images. Now, my all-time favorite secret weapon, anytime I'm looking for anything, is Unsplash. I just absolutely love this website. It started off a couple of years ago with a group of people, and they used to just release, say, 15 images every couple of days, whatever, free to use, and then it kind of grew into this behemoth of public domain photos, or well, I suppose they're not public domain, they're kind of use what you want, freely usable. Now it's always nice to obviously attribute it. Now in terms of Unsplash, normally what you do when you're looking, so you can search for, say, generic, say, themes. So for example, if you're doing a romance story, you might search love, and you get all these different things here. Some of these might be a good cover or a good start anyway. You can search for specific things, like if you were doing a cover on, I don't know, shark. So there are an absolute ton of different images, and I could literally spend all day browsing them. So some of these images are genuinely beautiful. And the great thing about them is because they're such high quality is that you rarely need to do any sort of retouch to them. Now, you might ask, can I take my own photo? And yeah, sure, you can take your own photo if you have a good camera and a pretty decent eye for composition and lighting. Because Photoshop, it can make a good photo great, but it's very hard to make a bad photo good. So the better quality your picture, the better your cover is going to look. Now, ideally, you're going to look for one single image that just is the perfect image for your cover, because compositing images are basically taking multiple images to make one. It's not a beginner's topic, and it's very, very, very hard to get right. Because with multiple images, you're going to be fighting against different camera angles, different lighting, different white balance, different FOV settings, like you name it. And when it comes to merging images, a lot of DIY covers, they kind of tend to go with this sort of fade option, which is great. I mean, if you're going for an 80s portrait style cover. Now, I've seen it done well, which you can see here for the Star Wars pictures. I mean, these are obviously kind of very high class professionals, but this is, when you're looking at kind of merging multiple images, this is what you're looking at. It's hard to do well. So I would try to stick to one. Most kind of authors, they go with this. This is an actual cover. I kind of blanked out the name because I don't want to actually call it the author for being bad, like a bad cover or whatever. But it's generally, they kind of take, say, 3 different random images, each with a different white balance, each with a different, taken with a different camera, and it's kind of just cut around, and then with a nice little blur. I say nice, but you know what I mean. It's a wee blur around the outside to kind of merge it all together. And in the end, it just doesn't look good. So try to stick to one image. All right. Remember, you're not trying to tell the entire story here. Now, I will mention one area where combining images in a very simple manner works quite well. And that's when you're using stuff like white space, negative space, double exposure, stuff like this here. For example, using the outline of a wolf with a picture of its natural habitat in mind. These are very, very simple images to do, but they can be very striking. Like this is just an absolutely beautiful cover for Lord of the Flies. But it's very, very simple because all this is just a cutout with a frame of an island behind it. You know what I mean? It's very, very well done, but it's very simple. So what do you do if your concept calls for something that doesn't exist? So let's say, for example, you're looking to do a dragon or barbarian or something magical, anything like this here. Now, personally, I would try to simplify the concept, because with things like this, if your only picture of, say, a barbarian is a guy dressed in a Halloween costume, you know, it's not going to be great. Like, you know, try to simplify it. Try maybe simplifying it to a sword or a broken helmet or something else that would kind of better encapsulate what your story is about, and then let the reader fill in the blanks. Now, I will kind of point out there is one website, for example, sometimes you would need to, let's say, take this image and cut it out, and it's not an easy task to do. Now, there is a website called remove.bg, which will automatically remove your image background, and it does a pretty decent effort of it now, in fairness, especially when it comes to hair, these sort of things. These are very, very hard to get done. So if you just go take a look here in the samples. So this is a pretty excellent thing, and it's very, very simple to do. You just upload your image and away you go. So say, for example, if we go back to the previous lesson now, if we wanted a, let's take a barbarian. Now, this is obviously not a real helmet, but let's, for the sake of argument, we'll say this is a better cover that we wanted. But we obviously don't want it stuck in a room somewhere. So by uploading to this website, we end up with something like this here. A nice cutout that we can then pose onto a background of our choice. So this is a very, very simple way of cutting out pitches, like if you're not kind of up into that. And I'm not going to lie, it is kind of it's not an easy thing to do. I've got years of Photoshop experience and I find it awkward to do. So this sort of website, it's pretty much godsend. Now, if you can't find the perfect image you want and you can't simplify it and stuff like this, honestly, you're kind of looking more at an Illustrator or a pre-made cover. Because trying to do it with something like these sort of kind of half images that aren't going to exist, like if you're kind of going to, okay, my guy is like this guy, and okay, except this time I need him to be super hairy, so I'm going to try to like Photoshop some hair onto his torso. It's just gonna end up bad. So what about computer generated characters? Now, if you can get photorealistic characters, then sure. Anything less than that, you're kind of it'll just position your book as a young adult / children's book. Now, when it comes to photorealistic, there is a bit problem because it's a lot of work to get the effect that you're looking for, because this is what we call the uncanny valley, right? Whereas the closer you get to realism here, the more off the character seems. So this is massive dip here. This is what we call the uncanny valley. All right, this is when like something, it just looks off, and you see it notably here. So the more, for example, you know, the big thing is, say, Japan, where they have robots and they're trying to get them more lifelike and stuff, but the more they approach human qualities, the more it seems weird, and it kind of freaks you out a bit. Like, and even high-end Hollywood studios and top game studios, and these guys are like, we're talking like maybe a 50 million, 100 million budget, they still struggle with this sort of thing. This is why, for example, if you saw one of the Superman films, you wonder why has he got such a weird face in some of these pictures. And that's actually because they had to do a few reshoots, but he ended up having a mustache. So they had to do CGI to get rid of the mustache in a lot of these reshoots. And that's why his face is so weird. And this is Warner Brothers. This is like a massive, massive studio. So if they can't do it, you know, I would kind of hesitate more towards changing the concept so it's a little bit simpler. Now, for non-characters such as spaceships and stuff like this, it's a little bit easier. I mean, because we don't have this issue with Uncanny Valley. So if you want to go into this, you're looking into something like physically based rendering. So here, there's lots of different programs you can use on. You can use Nick was talking about Daz 3D, which is free to use kind of 3D program, and they do lots of different things. So every once in a while, I have weekly freebies of three different models. Stuff like this. You also have, for example, Unity. Unity is probably one of the most well-known gaming engines, and where you can do physically based rendering of pretty much anything you want to imagine. Or, for example, Unreal Engine, which here they have a nice little show reel of some of the stuff they can do. Now, obviously, there's a pretty hefty learning curve to these sort of things. Now, once you get into it, or if, for example, you've already used it, now it can actually be beneficial because here, because it's a game engine, you can now use, for example, particles. You can use now code to set out your things. So if, for example, you wanted to design a swarm of ships, you know, it's easy to kind of get a very basic model and then code up some sort of like like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of ships like swarming around like flies. It's very, very easy to do. Now, one last point to keep in mind when you're choosing your image, right, don't forget that the title has to go into it, the title and your name. So for example, let's say we take like this picture here. If we wanted this as a cover, now our title, it can go here. Now if we were taking, say, this picture, then now our title and our name is kind of, it's covering like the main focus of the picture. So when you're doing it, you're either trying to get something with a bit of white space that you can kind of work with, or something that you can extend on to create that white space. For example, it's a bit hard now in terms of here because you've got a gradient, but this is a pretty solid color. So you could actually kind of take this little row of pixels and stretch it all the way up to make a cover, which kind of gives you that like extra space to put your title and your name and so on. Now, it just takes a little bit of searching around. It's possible to do, but if you can get an image that gives you a nice little clear patch, like here, be perfect. Nice little clear patch for your name and your title and stuff, then it's just go with it. Like.